So what do I want to show you? Let me see. I better kill some stuff first. I have a bunch of windows open.
It sounds interesting, by the way. Yeah, even to me, like I'm very curious.
Did I show you anything? I haven't shown you anything, have I?
Mm-mm.
At all. Okay. What version do I want to show you? 04. So I kind of got that to start with. I'll go somewhere else first. Yeah. So this is not what I'm presenting. This is just a quick sort of thing that I put together because I want to, just because it kind of fits with the theme. So we're at a point of impact, data portals, all this kind of stuff. Who knows what's happening with AI? We've got a global network of practitioners. We've got a very vast and uncommon data commons, and it's a trusted foundation to tackle complex challenges. So I'll probably end up using this sort of approach where I have a web page, it is built, but then it'll jump across to something else from time to time. So what I'm going to jump across to will be my global data barometer submission. This is kind of the current version. On day one, this is what I kind of put together as my first sort of crack at the attempt to use the global data barometer thing. So this isn't quite poetry, but it's kind of a reflection on what this is that I'm getting to, right? It's a co-construction. And so, this realm where digital goods forge their path through thematic segregation and regional inscription to entreat with unstructured primitives, where select few are validated in strict commission to recontour their local substrates. Just means, someone's going to run a survey. And so this kind of like reflection is to break down and sort of, fracture, I guess, what it is that this data set is, this austere sort of set of the way the world is, because someone went ahead and reported it. So it's kind of true, but it's all a story as well. The story is the thing that predates. And after the fact, when the data is kind of less relevant, it's kind of depreciated in its value. In 10, 20, 30 years, all that's going to be left is like this belief that the story mattered. It's almost like this kind of like mythology. So basically the first thing I did with this is I wanted to loop the challenge to my prior work in talking about constructor theory and trying to work out how we can do a procedural understanding of the universe and what data is. So this document is actually just a Gemini deep research, and it introduces a word, an important word, hallucifactual, which just means something that's being presented as fact, and it's almost certainly an hallucination from the LLM, but in the context that it's being presented, it's not necessarily that it's misinformation or disinformation, it's just presented as a hallucifactual. So the story that I might get by reading something that sounds pretty much correct, even if it's not correct, doesn't necessarily diminish the story. It only diminishes the truthfulness. So I'm kind of embracing the idea of hallucifactuals. I'm embracing hallucifacts, and I'm going with it, right? This co-construction. And the reason why I'm doing it is because I wanted to kind of demonstrate that that's what bias is, that creating something comes as an act of aggression. That act of aggression to create something fundamentally forms your bias upon it. And so LLMs and models are a good example of that. They're no different to us as people, and they're no different to global data barometer data sets. So Act 1 is basically me prompting. This is basically the prompt I use to get the deep research happening. So I'm kind of suggesting that, here's my idea, that's the data set. This is what I'm going to do, a competition. And my idea is to try and visualize the progression of raw data in a manner that would be understood within the application of constructor theory, which is related to transformations and what is possible and impossible. And I'm telling you, Gemini, to look it up. And then what's progression? What's the visualization progression? This is all the stuff I wanted to kind of really understand. And it comes back with a research plan, and it comes back with the article, which you read it and you kind of go, okay, that's nice. I understand a lot of the stuff in here, and I kind of understand what's rubbish and what's kind of okay, but it doesn't really matter. The story still fits my narrative. So in constructor theory, you have substrates, you have tasks, and you have constructors. A constructor could be someone like me. I have agency, and I can do things in a repeated way. So I can wake up in the morning every day, and I can have breakfast, and I can make some eggs and bacon or something like that. Because I can do that in a repeated fashion, that I'm a constructor. I'm able to do those sorts of things, such as tasks. And I can do those things through a substrate. So I work within the substrate of my lived environment to perform these tasks. And the tasks are possible. Some tasks are impossible. I can't just teleport to the moon, for example. And this idea of what's possible and impossible is a different way of describing the universe, of describing physics. So you can do it all the way down to quantum theory. You can do entanglement. You can do quantum tunneling. You do all this kind of stuff, describing it mathematically as these concepts of substrates, tasks, constructors, a bunch of other things as well. You'd have to look at the proper science. So anyway, what I'm trying to do is say, well, what is the global data barometer data set? And what can we learn from it in terms of what were the constructors and what's the transformation process? What's the substrate? Because I have this hunch that I'll be able to visualize that. But more importantly, by going into this investigation and trying to work out how to do it, I'll learn something about the data set if I take this sort of approach. So this is the deep research. It gets to the end. It has some recommendations. It finally gets to this sort of section, like synthesis of the methodological approaches, and says, well, you could use this causal constructor chain visualization. You could use a counterfactual landscape. You could use this interoperability failure network, and you can use this recursive loop system. They're all actually kind of different parts of the constructor chain and how I could visualize it. So I'd probably do all four. It's just how much time we've got, right? And these layers and then the flows is the sort of thing that it's sort of suggesting. It's all pretty cool. It's all pretty easy, or sort of doable, I should say. So for me, it feels like a good way to do it, a good way to enter into this competition and do something that maybe someone else wouldn't do. And I feel like I'd be valuable to the competition by doing that. So that was the end of Act 1. Act 2 was where one of my other interests is coming into place, which is creating more demand for data. And I think the way to create demand for data is we have more people practicing on data. We have people like me doing exactly what I'm doing with this challenge, right? I'm looking at a data set, I'm trying to do something interesting with it. And I want that data to give me that opportunity. So should I get something interesting out of it, literally I learn, I feel empowered, I get good practice, or I create something to benefit other people, then I'm going to want more of that data. I'm going to want others to give me more of that kind of data, right? So I'm trying to build that demand by demonstrating the fun, the joy, and the innovation of it. Just not for advocacy of some challenge in the world, not because I want to start a movement around climate action or anything like that. Just for the fun of it, right? So Act 2 as well is a reflection on this sort of constructive, co-constructive journey. And I'm kind of just saying to Gemini as my co-constructor that, I want to tell you something, but he says yes. Knowledge operations shape our shared reality. So when we work with knowledge, then that becomes a shared knowledge or a shared reality. And so Gemini is just kind of saying yes, and now you can review these notes. So you should make sure that they're accurate, which is what Gemini does whenever it transcribes or takes notes. So what I did was the next day, I had my next block build. So that was on the Friday morning. And that was a 2-hour session. It went on for actually more like 3. And what I did was I read that document and I formatted that document that came out of the research notes. And through that process, I verbalized all the things that I thought was kind of wrong, a bit of a counterfactual, a bit of a false lead, I guess. Like it kind of asserted that things like OGP, IDRC, like whether they're the political, ideological sort of constructors or the financial constructors, that in a lot of ways that they're the force behind the global data barometer. And it might sort of be true after the fact, but you know that these things get formed up and they get created by pretty much individuals or small groups of people that identify a challenge, and they work out something that could surface within the environment of that challenge, the substrate, let's say, and a couple of tasks that they think should become repeatable, and they use their own agency, and they create this constructor engine. They create this sort of thing that ends up being as big as the global data barometer and as expansive as a 2-year, multi-country, multi-jurisdictional, multi-sort of pillar survey. Such a thing that's as big as what it is, where it's releasing a database challenge. But it's not like OGP created that. OGP are part of the ecosystem, and they're part of the substrate, and they're part of the sustainability or the auxiliary functions of what this thing is, right? So this is the kind of stuff I verbalized as going through the document and just sort of pointing it out. So these are the notes from that 3-hour session talking about social physics, open data, and the Objective Observer Initiative, all this kind of stuff. And I brought it back into the document. So it's all kind of self-referential. And at the end of that, which is pretty much the end of the day on Friday, because I was doing it while also working, I just wanted to kind of wrap it up and said, so Gemini, like if you're helping me with this and I'm recognizing that you're part of this co-construction process, how would I reference you as an AI LLM, as a tool, within this document, within this sort of process? And so it answered the question in sort of detail, but this was the final statement. So I took that as what I'm going to do. When I submit this thing, that's going to be my sort of thesis, I guess, or my sort of abstract submission. But then, also repeated it because I'm in a loop, right? So I asked the question, then I've presented the full outline of how that answer came about. And importantly, the last bit of that answer was, what is the cascade? What is this chat session that we're going through? Because the initial substrate is the GDB itself. The global data barometer is the substrate through which all of this constructor activity is occurring. The first act was me observing it, getting involved. The second was to sort of prompt and get the research. The third was me to absorb the knowledge and basically refine it, right? So I'm literally reading it out. And my new prompt, which is kind of like how we move forward from this and take notes and sort of like get it all going. And then the final prompt, which is this very question, becomes this loop referential framework, which again creates this answer. So that's part one. That was day one, essentially. As well as doing that during day one, there's all these other things. So there's the actual transcript. So this is the literal transcript of those 3 hours of vocalizing. Then there's this, which you'd be familiar with. Gemini can export into whatever you want. So this sort of transformation process for constructors, the IDRC, OGP, and kind of talking about as different co-constructors within the engine of the global data barometer. Some initial data viz. So basically the implementation gap that I mentioned earlier. This is sort of just saying that a lot of organizations, countries, I should say, will do the governance stuff. And they'll get a pretty good score for that, but they won't get as good in terms of the political integrity. Like, is this program integrated with the politics of the country? And they'll do even worse in terms of the kind of like the use and impact. Okay, so there's this implementation gap that occurs. There's also an interoperability failure, and this is an interesting one because it does kind of relate to constructor theory about what's possible and impossible. So you might have a lot of countries that'll have lobbying registers, but they won't necessarily have a registry of political finance kind of groupings that will be able to cross-reference those things. So even though you know who the lobbyists are, the political finance is not as transparent, and so you can't really do that kind of link up between them to create the kind of integrated data picture that they might want. Public contracts and lobbying is different. There's more of a connection between those two, but public contracts and company ownership, beneficial ownership, is not quite there. So you could be issuing a contract to someone and ultimately not knowing who really owns, who's the benefit from owning that contract. So those sorts of gaps are really important to understand. Behind the scenes, Loop 2 was another, just a data viz one that comes out of Gemini as a sort of example. I tried to work towards getting an actual functional spec using, again, my co-constructor Gemini. I didn't really like it, didn't look very interesting. So I just went ahead and said, well, just build me a data explorer. It's just use the CSV file of all the data sets and throw it into something so I can visualize it and scroll through it and filter it. So I did that, and that was all part of day one, let's say. And it does only partially sort of work because it had some bugs and I didn't bother fixing it. But it does partially work. Again, that was all day one. Day two, I carried on with the theme of having the first sort of index page be a medium. So the previous one was like a typed page. This one is a dictionary reference sort of item. So I've taken the two invented words from the day before. Hallucifactual. Put them in as if they're real words, and kind of just whacked in here where we've gotten to. You're also seeing stuff on screen, which is part of me refactoring in my fourth iteration, because I have to do some extra security work and a few things for these old versions. But I did a bit more work on this one. I basically did a bunch of stuff you can't see to improve it, so it does properly work for the filtering and all this kind of stuff. But I also noted I wanted to expose, like I said, my process here is being engaged with the data set. And so a lot of what I'm trying to visualize is my process. So the data visualization is not necessarily a graph at the end of it or an interactive or an animation. It's the visualization of this process I'm going through, from the first day I engage with the data to eventually the 16th or whatever date it is that I submit. Whatever that journey is and how much of it I can externalize and visualize is my data visualization. And so this is where I started to put out, my notes about what I think I should fix, what are the security issues, all helped along by my co-constructor. Same thing with MySQL. I'm still just using like a CSV, and that's a very terrible way. It's of kind of doing it. It's not gonna load well when there's multiple concurrent users. It's good enough for testing, but as soon as I want to do something kind of sophisticated, I'm going to have to properly migrate the CSV to a database. That was about it. Day three, I was starting to get a sense of what I wanted to do. So yeah, this is day three, basically. Admittedly, I'm showing you day three with the fourth additions added on as well, because day three proper is pretty much this, but I'm just fixing a bunch of stuff. And because it's like school day now, it's like, proper work days, I don't have as much time as the weekend. So I'm making this longer fourth iteration take about 4 days rather than a day each. But my data explorer, well, actually I won't go there yet. It's part of like visualizing what I'm doing. I wanted to create a communication space or a social hub, like this concept that what I'm doing is being socialized and sort of put out there, which it is. And this cuts over to the presentation I want to do for the CCAM Monthly Live, that's part of externalizing this as well. So these emails, I've got a Google group where I'm exposing some of this stuff. There was another conversation on a block build I did on Sunday morning, and Paul Connor from the Canadian Open Data Society joined. So these are the notes from that conversation. He asked me about my persona, Stalin, where it came from. And so my answers in here about, where it came from when I was in the 80s, when I was playing D&D. And that's why this this AI gen image has got Dungeons and Dragons, a bunch of kids playing D&D, why this guy's got a mullet and a BMX. And it's all from the 80s. It's actually looking a bit more 90s, but yeah, generally it's meant to be people with social communicative type stuff. So the telephone, the post box, the writing, the reading, and this sort of social play and learning. But yeah, the profile is there. It's generated this profile of me as Stalin from its interactions with me during this development process so far. And it's also got a profile for the block build activity. So that's that. That'll become a feature over the next, however long I've got, another week almost. There's a system tracker. This was a feature I wanted to build at the end of day 3. So I just had the first spec of it. This 4th iteration now that I've been working on has actually got the feature partially implemented. So this is to kind of, not so much gamify, but encourage discovery, because by discovering, people will kind of start to have the same experience as me, that to know the data, you have to kind of experiment with it and try and understand what works, what doesn't work, what can be visualized. If you're going to visualize, if you're going to do a filter, what's the point of then visualizing that filter? Like, what are you looking for? And a good visualization will appeal to people without knowing that they're looking for the insights. But if you're going to go and create a visualization, you have to kind of like be challenged by those insights. You have to bump into things first. So I'm trying to encourage people to do that. And through that, I want to have Easter egg style reveals. So this next version of the Data Explorer doesn't look any different. In fact, I'm not focused on the look and feel of this yet at all. But if I now search to say filter by governance, so I've got 18,000 records, filter by this. My Easter egg's already been revealed, but basically a pop-up comes. Now that I'm less than 3,000 records, I can go to these two. That's the first edition. This is the second edition. It's sort of improved. And what this is a physics explorer. So basically what it does is, if you click on any of these balls that drop down, so I'll just turn off the elevation or the buoyancy, you can start to assign properties. So it randomly assigns a property from the result set to any of these balls. And if by chance the balls then link to anything else, it'll create a link like this orange one. It gets a bit slow, so you can change it from click mode to just mouse over, and then it'll be a bit quicker. But if you want it to be fully quick, you can just click all, and it'll pop them in. And so if you turn off, you can turn off gravity, and you can kind of bring things in. I think you can centralize the gravity. I think that's the right way to do it. I know. There's a couple I haven't fixed in terms of bugs, but that's basically it. You can drop more balls, and they'll sort of, oops, I cleared it. Oops. But anyway, the point is you get to play with it, right? These extra controls here are telling you when you're dropping balls, what you're clicking on.
The bow is a data set or a country, or?
It's a record in this. So each record, the way that the data set comes out, it sort of has the data of its hierarchy in each row. So it just means that even though a row might relate to a level 4 indicator, it still has the country that it's related to, or the pillar, and all this sort of stuff. So the idea is if you click on two indicators that are both have the same lineage in terms of that hierarchy, then you end up with those collecting. They become these bigger balls. So this bigger ball, which is 3 times the size of this one, sort of in volume, it's going to have like 6 indicators that have merged into that one, where this one might only have 2 or 3. And this one hasn't yet found the thing that it would link to. They should all, if it's correct, they should all link to the central one. But I'm discovering that they kind of don't. So it's either a bug in my code at the moment, or it's the way the filters work, and the filters don't have that full connection because of the way I'm filtering.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing, right? You muck around and you go, how come this one doesn't connect? And if I was to go back and I was to reset everything, and I was going to go to level 4, for example. So everything should be a level 4 filter, which is like an indicator. And then if I go to equitable access, how many have we got? 1,400. Have a look at that one. And I can better show you these things now. I might still have some bugs, but that's the legend. I do have some bugs because this keeps disappearing or keeps collapsing. But each time I click on one, it'll show you what has been assigned to that ball, and it'll change each time. But what you'll see with these ones is if I select everything, it only creates blue balls because they're all level 4 items, right? Know what I mean? So there's no connections there. They're all just level 4. And so when I'm doing those other filters, it means that some of those filters exclude the full chain, and so you don't get everything connected. The point of this, though, is I'll go back here. Oh, you don't get to see it. If I make this that way, here we go. So on mobile, this is what it looks like. It's a different background on mobile that changes. There's a picture of me. So basically that's been revealed. When you get the Easter egg, it's revealed that I'm in the machine looking back at you. And it won't happen now, but if I was on mobile and I shake my mobile, it'll then crack the screen. So there's a reason for all that, and it's all to do with like the fourth wall and all this kind of stuff, like the observer, the observed, the perspective. And so these sort of philosophical concepts I'm trying to bring into it eventually. And the last one I haven't shown you is the system, the rain one. So this is a rain one. I wanted to create an exploration that's based on just starting from the country. Like you have to start outside the global world, the global data barometer. And I'm taking the barometer thing, meaning that the pressure, high pressure, low pressure, which has a connotation for rain. And I'm just sort of saying, well, what is the sort of differences between all these places? If I pick, say, Brazil, and I'm going to do this rain data explorer, then what it's going to do is it's going to tell me about shadow constructors. So what I first want to do is ask, is it actually raining in Brazil right now? And it's a simple question, right? But the entitlement that comes with that question will be based on a lot of different factors. So the kind of shadow constructors I'm trying to reveal here would be, where's the actual data coming from? It's a meteorological organization, but it's the Brazilian one, let's say, or it might be part of an old British Empire. It might still use a different sort of meteorological society. What is the location that we're talking about when we say Brazil? Because there's more than one place in Brazil, and typically people will be thinking Sao Paulo, but it won't necessarily be the most populous. In this case, probably is, but all these sorts of things are actually shadow constructors of the data that we might be thinking about when we're asking about, is it raining in Brazil? And there's other biases, there's missing data, there's indigenous knowledge that would typically have related to weather and forecasting and thinking about these ideas. And things like data gap can come from the history of a place and where the economic development has come from. So you won't always find that weather stations are in the places that you might think are reasonable for society or for civilized populations. They might be because there's a history of mining in that activity in that area, and so they wanted instrumentation and weather stations and stuff because that was important for the economic development. And these are the shadow constructors that will influence the data as well. And so again, time, space, and probability is basically events, and all data is a measurement of typically 2, maybe 3 of those things. And weather's a good example because today, what the temperature might be today, you might say could be predicted based on past measurements. You might say the average rainfall in this particular month, in this particular place, is this, because you might have 100 years of measurements in this particular place. And so the shadow constructor that makes that data that you might have about probabilities for today, based on the past dependency, the path dependency of the past. And that's kind of an entitled position. Similarly, when we've got things like climate change or climate disruption, the value of that stuff is diminished. And the privilege comes from having good forecasting, supercomputer, trajectory management, and all like simulations and such into the future to predict, do you have weather in the next 7 days? And all of that also depends on how much infrastructure you've got for instrumentation and weather tracking, things like that. So this whole question of time, space, and probability for whether it's raining opens up this whole world of shadow constructors. And I'm saying this because when you look at something like a data set from the Global Data Barometer, like I said, it's an act of creation. It's an act of aggression to make that thing. And it's fighting against all of this path dependency and history and bias of all the things that might make the data not be helpful or not be useful or not be representative. And that, again, that's what I'm, through this whole process, that's what I'm kind of visualizing and sharing and coming to know myself as well. But yeah, I have to finish that one. I've only gotten to step 1, and it's using hallucifactuals. So all of that information you just saw there, it's completely generated by AI. It's complete rubbish, probably, or it's partially rubbish. And so my next sort of attempt is to then make this not just a data set that's like a visualization of the Global Data Barometer, to make it a future forward one and invite crowdsourcing and collaboration. So if folks want to take something like that rainfall one and actually provide a suggestion for actual counterfactuals or shadow constructors or actual indigenous knowledge, then I want to open that up and allow people to submit it. And I think that would be like the next stage of sort of making this a data viz experiment of the type that I think is kind of fun, which is a collaborative and open and transparent one. I think that's about it. I've got all this tracking is working, but oops, there's -1. I just got some debuggers that should allow me to clear all the cookies. Oh, yep. That's it. So if I go, I've cleared all the cookies. So if I go to 3 again now, you can see the background is not, oh, that's the different background. This background, that's the Neo Geo one. So if I went to that data explorer and unlocked it, then it changes to a picture of me looking forward. And I want to, like I said, introduce more of that looped referential stuff, because that's the philosophy and that's the real lesson. How was that? That was like 40 minutes.
It's very obviously interesting, and you've created many systems. Yeah, it's overwhelming, I would say, but definitely it's interesting. And are you planning to? So you're not going to present this process at the Second Monthly Live?
So the actual presentation, let me have a look.
But you're gonna present part of it, right? Like some of the things you're.
Yeah, I'm referring to it. It's in the sort of like takeaways. So hang on, let me share a screen again.
So my approach generally, because it's a lot of information and most of the people don't have context. I have certain context, but it's not super deep, so it's a bit different. But then the audience there doesn't have context. So when you're delivering complex ideas or theories, like generally my approach would be mean to pyramid principle. It's probably you've heard of it. I don't know if you've heard. It's a communication like guidelines and a way of structuring information so that people can actually percept it better. So because the things are a bit more complex, first deliver the main message, like this is what I'm saying, right? And then get to why you're saying this and then explanation. So that would be my approach. I'm just sharing based on what I've heard.
But yeah, you're right. In terms of just telling the basics, there's this message about what CCAN is today. And the message I want to convey is that it's very, very well connected right now to something that's going on in society. And we have this ability to kind of rise up as a community and address a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of, it's there for us to grab. And the kind of challenges that we need to sort of grapple with is like, responsible AI. I think there's a rise of digital authoritarianism that we have to be aware of and sort of like combat. And there is a difficulty in building a shared understanding of social justice when everyone's got an opinion and people can be dismissive and all this kind of stuff. So data has this amazing importance in our society right now, that we can't have social justice unless we've got data justice. We need to be able to have a data justice movement. And so the CCAN/open data movement, by having a social track and a data track, is already primed to be like an evolutionary next step for social justice. And so, yeah, the data justice movement is the way I sort of see it. But this is kind of then kind of like a how. Like, how do you move from what data is to what it actually does? How do you tell the story of what data does to people? How it comes from something that they've done in the past, and how it can be effective for something they're going to do in the future. And that's what constructor theory attempts to do as a scientific sort of methodology of describing process and change and what's possible and not possible. So it is literally a science of what you can and can't do. But it's also a mental model. So I think for this CCAN community, it's a mental model that should resonate, that some things are quite possible because there's the funding, there's the people behind it, there's literally the technologies that can actually measure things. And some things, they might not be like physically impossible, but they're so improbable and so difficult to orchestrate, they might as well be an impossibility. They're kind of on the list of can'ts. But for a community like us, it's about what we can do, right? So we can think about us as constructors. We can think about us as individuals, but we can think of ourselves as a system of individuals. Like I said, that we're already a community. We're already a sleeping giant. And we've already got kind of like this substrate Like, we've got this amazing access with government programs. We've got amazing access into industry, because industry understands that data feeds innovation. And that substrate is something that we can move in, because we're the like the technorati. You know, we've understood how to negotiate our way through these conversations about data and how it can be used for information systems. So the real question is, you know, what are we going to task ourselves with? What are we going to consider as possible and impossible? And as a community, we can look at the meta level of that. We can say, as a community, what is possible for the CCAN project as software? What is software for the CCAN project as a community of practice? And what are we going to set ourselves out to kind of do, right? And this is where I want to bring in the case studies. Like, here I am as an individual, as a one person, not wearing my CCAN hat, but wearing my own joy of not missing out hat, like joy of mucking around with something, having some fun. And that's where the case study of the Global Data Barometer comes in. So it's just, you know, it's not just me building a visualization. It's not just getting to the data. It's visualizing the process of what the data has created within me, and what the data has potential to create in others. And also trying to reveal, in a kind of practical way, the novel thing is to reveal the physics of these shadow constructors in a way that I think is contemporary, that relates to the idea of digital authoritarianism that might be this dark age of this sort of undercurrent. I think people feel it, that there are sort of forces, you might say, or rivers that flow, that will flow with their current, if we don't interrupt them, if we don't create a bank that will turn those currents away from places that we don't want them to go. And so I think this is like the shadow physics, or the physics of shadow constructors. But yeah, all that sort of foreboding, there's nothing evil or nothing bad about the Global Data Barometer. It's really just trying to shed a light on indicators across the world in different particular ways that provide transparency. So, but it is a good one in terms of data justice. So it is a lot of people co-constructing this concept of equity and this idea of, you know, the global south and the countries that it's bringing the indicators from. So, you know, the most important actual outcome for working on this stuff is definitely not the visualization. It's just using this sort of like challenge process to re-empower myself, to remind myself that I once was a developer. You know, I once built stuff, and I absolutely can build stuff again. I learned a long time ago that the best way to build stuff is with others. In this experiment, my others were my co-constructors like Gemini and Claude Sonnet, sure. But my others actually reached out into space and time. They were the Global Data Barometer themselves. There was my knowledge that if I could build something that's fun, I'd be able to present it to others, like, you know, the CCAN community. So that throughput, that substrate that I know that I have access to is kind of like the most valuable thing. So this is why I want to invite people to also experience this. This is why I kind of set up the ODSXs or the block builds. It's just this idea that, just like, you know, a couple of generations ago, people would carve out 2 hours on a Thursday night to play canasta or play quoits or, you know, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a game type thing, but to occupy ourselves as social people, to come together and do stuff together. And for this particular community, the idea of coming together and building things, it doesn't mean we have to come together and sit with each other. It doesn't mean we have to work on the same stuff. But by blocking out the same time, and over multiple people blocking out different times, overlapping, we can create a bridge from today to any days in the future when we want to create civic tech together. So that's where I started with the ODSXs. It just, ODS is repulsive, right? And in this philosophy of how do we see the world? There's only one subjective viewpoint, which is us. Everything else is repulsive to us. We're literally on our own in the universe. And so an odious Xer is just simply someone who understands that their subjective self is where X marks the spot, but it's a call for collaboration. It's not a call for isolation, right? It's a call to say that they are unique. They do have agency. They do have empowerment that's ready to be collectively brought into a project. And that's it. So, you know, how we just do the block builds. We co-design, we co-develop, and we join up in whatever way we might want to. And then the data justice movement, it's going to happen in its own course, but my ambition is that by working together, we build on the social track, a technical track that already exists in the CCAN community. You know, we're going to build it. And if it's just me and it's just one block, I'm totally down with that. I'm totally cool with it. And that's it.
All right. Yeah, it sounds exciting. I will look forward to the presentation and to what's gonna happen.